Guys, we have a great episode of the Glad Trad podcast today. I'm joined by Kennedy Hall yet again to discuss the question on every American's mind. Is Kennedy ready for Canada to enter the United States? Now, just playing, but seriously, it's a great conversation all about the election of Donald Trump and a little bit of politics for both the USA and Canada. And this show could not happen without all of your support, especially for our patrons and channel members. So if you want to support the show, go on over to patreon.com/gladtradpodcast or hit that join button down below if you would like to be a channel member. And please, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and to share this video far and wide. Now, without further ado, let's have some fun today. This is the Glad Trad Podcast. Hey, Kennedy, I'm glad that you're back on, brother. Thank you so much for coming on. And I just want to know right out of the gate, are you as excited as I am that you're about to become an American in the 51st state that the United States very much needs? Because we need you. We could use you.
No, but
Wow.
not because I don't like the U.S. for other reasons.
I'm sure we'll get into that. So I've been reading some of your articles, and the last time we talked was a great kind of conversation about Catholicism in Canada. And obviously we're still kind of celebrating down here. Well, some of us are. Half the country they say is crying, but I don't really believe that. I went to the inauguration actually, which was a really, really exciting time.
That's fun.
It was fun. It was raucous and it was cold, but
it wasn't cold. Come on, you can't tell me something was cold there.
Oh, I forgot. Right, our neighbor. Okay, hang on. Here's a question. Right,
Yeah.
So I can't remember exactly where in Canada you live, but what is this time of year? How cold are we talking?
I live in southwestern Ontario.
Okay.
Which Canada's funny because I'm actually more south than lots of parts of Michigan, but because of the jet stream and the lakes, it's super cold. My weather is like northern Michigan weather. So I run in the morning at 5:30. And the other day when I was running, it was minus 30 Celsius, which was like minus 17 Fahrenheit.
Okay. So maybe I don't have rights. I mean, I'm in Colorado, but there's no rights.
You get snow there.
Yeah, we got snow there. Yeah, it gets cold. We got like 10 degrees last week, or as you would say.
It's about 10 degrees Fahrenheit right now here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So never mind. I don't have rights to complain. I totally get this. Kennedy, why don't you want to become an American? All these great base Canadians keep moving down here. Jordan Peterson just moved down here. We like I said, we could definitely use you. What about being a Canadian is the reason to stay?
Well, it's just the reason why anyone loves their own country. I have had the pleasure of traveling to a few countries it's New Year now, but last year doing some speaking gigs, a pilgrimage to Italy, and I lived in Italy when I was younger. I'm an Italian citizen, and I just love everyone's country, and I love that they love their country. I support Trump supporters. I support Trump because they support their country, and that makes sense. I support people in every country that love their nation and want to uphold their history. I think that's super important. Thomas Aquinas would talk about patriotism. The word patriotism wasn't used. I think it's actually piety he talks about. But it's a subset of the commandment to honor your father and your mother. It's like we're running a men's conference with our Holy Name Society in about 2 weeks, actually. And it's called the Canadian Martyrs Men's Conference because we honor St. Isaac Jogues and St. Jean de Brébeuf. And, my buddy just made these beautiful pipes, actually. He's like a plumber, but he's like a genius and can make anything. And, he's got a little imprint of St. Isaac Jogues' hand on the pipe that he etched into it. And it's missing the tip of his thumb and the tip of his index finger. And it's like, he died just down the road from me. And his blood is in my soil. And it's really special, So there's just something about where you're from and where you grew up. It's just a special place to you. And I love the U.S. And I don't know if we will actually become. You never know with Trump. You never know. But but I don't think the solution is to absorb other countries. I think our countries are already big enough, if that makes sense. So those are my basic reasons. But I'm sure, I've traveled a lot in the States, and I'm sure if I was, under an American regime versus my regime, I'm sure I'd still be very happy because ours is arguably worse. So it's not a government thing. It's more of just a patriotism thing.
Well, and rightly so. And I will say this, as I do say, there's for the show I host, Ask a Priest Live, we have a Canadian priest, Canon Sharp, who's absolutely wonderful. But because the station's based out of Buffalo, I
Yeah.
discovered, of course, that Canadians do have rights to one up the United States when it comes to the fact that we tried to invade twice, the war, the Revolutionary War, and the War of 1812, and you guys ended up burning down the White House. So I was in DC a couple weeks ago, and as I was looking at the beautiful American Federalist architecture, all I could think of was the fact that 200 years ago it was a pile of ash, thanks to you guys. So,
I actually think that's why the White House is white,
mm.
because they painted over the burn.
Oh, that would.
I actually think that's why. I think that's why. And funny, yes, we get a bad rap nowadays because we have this, dandy in Parliament who crosses his leg funny and goes to Taylor Swift concerts, and his name is Justin Trudeau. But I mean, this is a country where the old joke here is I went to a boxing match and a hockey game broke out.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, our favorite sport is punching each other in the face with no gloves on, on ice while we shoot rocks at each other. And historically, this isn't good, but it's indicative. Canadians were guilty of a lot of brutality in war. If you actually look at the history of the Canadians in the Boer War, which why were we in the Boer War? Because it was a Commonwealth thing in South Africa. The First World War and the Second World War, Canadian troops were known for extremely vicious stuff. I'm not saying the vicious side was good, but we are pretty old school, tough people historically. But now it's now we've got a lot of unfortunate characters representing our country, but we have been pretty tough historically.
Well, it's funny that you say that. I was got into a huge World War I phase, and
Okay.
one thing that I very much admired, I can't exactly remember the name of the battalion, but there was the special kind of talking about Canadian regiments and their ferocity and their dedication, also the accomplishments many of them made in that war. And of course, there's plenty of history too. So when you mention, and maybe this actually leads to a really interesting question. So obviously now with the election of Trump, there's all this talk, and there's been all this talk about what exactly makes for the American spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And are we so back? I've been saying that all week. We're so back. But what does it actually make? So, I think that there's a lot of shared, and maybe it's because of a shared language and to some extent a shared heritage between Americans and Canadians. What would you say makes up the Canadian spirit? I think we often just say, oh, they're very polite, but I've seen hockey. I just was at an Avalanche game not long ago where half of our team's from Canada anyway. So there is a Canadian ferocity kind of behind the stereotypical politeness that I've always admired.
Well, we're British and French. So, I mean, it's kind of like, what is British and French, the French are very tough. I mean, they get a bad rap because we make stereotypes about, Parisian, haute cuisine and things like that. But if you look at their military history, I mean, they're ferocious. They love rugby over there almost as much as soccer. They're a very fierce and very, I guess you would say, proud in the good sense kind of people where they'll really defend their own. So Quebec is historically a place of very tough people. Actually, so we have professional football here as well. There's a bunch of Canadians in the NFL, but the majority of the Canadians that go pro play in the Canadian Football League. And if I was to use another sport as an analogy, it's like, the NFL is like the NBA, and then Canadian Football League is like Europe basketball. So it's pro, but it's not as elite as the most elite league. So. But a lot of the players are French. Like, they love football in Quebec. They really, really love that, and they're really good at it. They're historically national champs for the university often. So they're pretty tough. And the French that came over were the toughest ones out of there because, I mean, who in their right mind would get on a boat in the 1600s to go to New France?
Yeah.
I mean, like, what kind of crazy person do you have to be? I mean, you show up to the St. Lawrence River, and you can only get out like 4 months a year because it's frozen, and you're going to go winter in a small colony where you're going to eat basically salt pork and potatoes and turnips for 7 months.
Well, you mentioned St. Isaac Jogues and Jean de Brebeuf's right in there, and I was very blessed to be able to go to the Shrine of the North American Martyrs in New York. Still have to go to the one across the way, but just as you're saying, it's a tough environment, and the fact that in that time, especially where you might leave the friendly Hurons and go someplace quite dangerous, and the way that I think you talk about the spread of colonialism, the differences between how the French kind of did it versus the very kind of destructive British way of doing things. It all factors in, I find.
Yeah, and the Brits, it's a mixed bag. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the British Empire is probably the closest thing we've had to like a Roman Empire since Rome, in the sense that, I mean, you can write a book about Rome as being an evil empire. You can write about it as being the greatest empire ever. You know, Britain's kind of the same way, because the funny, Britain was brutal in a lot of ways, but they were also, invaluable in their patronage of the arts and literature and things. And, we actually have the Brits to thank for Canada being so Catholic historically, because
That's not something I expected you to say.
no, it's true. And it's the same reason we have the Brits to thank for Catholicism in places like Pakistan, weirdly enough, because although they would persecute Catholics in mainland England, in all of the colonies where the population was Catholic, they had a tolerance for it as a sort of decorum.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite saints is Saint Edmund Campion. I adore him. And, when he wanted to escape the persecution in England, when he kind of converted back to what he was baptized a Catholic. He was born right at the time of the split of the Anglican Church. So his family was Catholic, but he was raised Anglican with the penal laws and stuff. And he went to Ireland. And because there was a new Jesuit college in Dublin, just across the ocean, just across the sea, not even the ocean. It's like, 3 hours on a ferry. And they were able to, with restrictions, but Britain kind of allowed for that. So funny enough, we've never had anti-Catholicism in Canada in any degree, because when they had this war between the French and the English, it was just an obvious thing that you weren't going to stop the French from being Catholic. So that meant if Canada was going to be a nation as a whole, the Catholics across the whole country were going to be not just tolerated, but even in our founding documents, we actually have a privilege for Catholics. And that was signed by the British. Sir John A. Macdonald was their first prime minister, and he was actually Scottish. He was a Freemason as well. They were all were Freemasons.
Same down here.
Yeah, and but it was signed off by it would have been the Queen at the time, and that was allowed. And so, funny enough, historically across Canada, all the provinces, they all had funding and allocation of resources for Catholic education, even if it wasn't majority Catholic in the province. So funny enough, we have the Brits to thank for the Catholicization of Canada.
Okay. Well, you learn something new every day. Like, I think as we kind of learn about the French and Indian War down here, we just kind of take it up as just this huge compromise that the British had to make in order to hold on to Quebec, lest they have endless kind of French revolts on their hands.
Yeah. Yeah. There's an aspect of that as well. The Brits are very pragmatic, and
That's true.
Protestants, that period with Queen Elizabeth I was really bad in England.
Yeah.
And she was excommunicated officially by Pius V, and Catholics were forbidden from giving obeisance to the crown, which was very controversial because it's not even necessarily the case that, like, a Catholic can give obeisance to a heretical crown from a perspective, like the same way St. Paul does to the emperor. He's the diakonos of the death penalty, he calls them. He's an evil. Nero is evil, but he is the emperor, and that's the authority structure, which is hierarchical, and it stems from from the authority of God. And but after that, I mean, Britain kept going through its own revolutions. They kept having their own revolutions within a revolution, and over time, what Catholics were doing became kind of the least of your worries, because now you've got 57 different Protestant sects vying for power. Yep. And after that really bloody period, there was a let-off, really, and they just started to tolerate Catholics. It was persecuted, like in the sense of social.
Yeah.
But then by the time of Victoria, it's the Toleration Act. And if you ever go to London, England, and go to the Brompton Oratory, I mean, it's one of the most, I was just in Rome and Assisi and Florence, like just a month and a half ago. Let's talk about beautiful churches. The Brompton Oratory looks like one of the most beautiful churches you could ever imagine in Rome, in the middle of London, England. And it was built under Queen Victoria with her permission, so it's a mixed history.
What is, speaking of kind of authorities over us, we hear down here that Trudeau is out or going out. And I don't know exactly how that process exactly works as far as Canadian politics are. But what's the lay of the land there? Is Trudeau, is it lame duck essentially? Is he out? Is he going to hold on? How does that work?
Okay, so it's January 28th as we record this. At the latest, there will be an election called in September or October because that's when the next election is set.
Okay.
It's a parliamentary system. So at any moment, if you don't have majority government, meaning you don't have a certain amount of seats in the House that are more than the rest of the opposition seats combined, you can have what's called a non-confidence vote. So if the opposition parties, and there are, the Green Party has like one seat, but there's the Liberals, which is Trudeau's party. There's the New Democrats, which is like a far left party, which it'd be like if Bernie Sanders started his own party. They're big on unions and stuff like that. They're small, but they have, let's say, 20 seats.
Sure.
There's the Bloc Québécois, which is a French nationalist party in Quebec that wants to separate from Canada. But they have about 40 MPs. They're actually quite substantial. And then there's the Conservative Party of Canada, which has, I think, about 120 seats right now, and the Liberals have something like 140. So the Conservatives are the official opposition. Okay, so if you have a non-confidence vote, which can be put forth by the opposition parties, as long as you have more votes, let's say we want to get rid of the ruling government and have an election, then you have an election. So the Liberals have a minority government, meaning they don't have more than the rest of the seats combined. So they're at the mercy of the other parties. So what has happened? Trudeau's popularity has plummeted to epic proportions. I mean, I have some inside knowledge with a friend of a family who was the president of the Liberal Party of Canada for many years. Not a politician, but of the actual sort of party side of things. And he said that, basically all the old school Liberals are like, this man has destroyed our party for 20 years. They're going to be bottom of the barrel whenever the election happens. So what happened is internally in Trudeau's party, they basically had a revolt. And so what he did is he announced his resignation as the party leader. That doesn't mean he stepped down as the prime minister. What it means is, presently, because we don't have vice presidents in Canada.
Okay.
You have the leader of the party, and if that party is in the position of having the mandate to form the parliament because they have the most seats, then the leader of that party assumes the role as prime minister. So when we go to the polls, we don't vote for the prime minister. We vote for whichever member of parliament is in our district.
I see. Okay.
So no one votes for Justin Trudeau except for those who live in his Papineau, which is a suburb of Montreal, riding. Riding means district. So he's resigning as party leader, and right now what they're doing is they're having a leadership race within the Liberal Party. So he has prorogued Parliament, which is a fancy way of saying he's paused it, which is a privilege that the Prime Minister has. And it's paused for like 2 months. Why? Well, because all the parties in Parliament right now are saying we will all vote to get him out. So if he reconvenes Parliament after the Christmas break, then within a couple weeks, he's gone. And now the Liberal Party itself is in free fall. What they're trying to do now is they're using this little break to select a new leader who will then assume the role, and then there'll probably still be a confidence vote, and then we'll have an election probably sometime in the summer. That's the lay of the land. So people say, oh, he's not leaving, etc. No, he's leaving. His party's literally having a race right now within, and different MPs are vying for leadership, but he is still the prime minister until that new leader is elected.
Who is currently the best shot for helping Canada kind of get righted, to kind of remove the stain of Trudeau from the mouths?
Pierre Poilievre. He is the leader of the Conservatives. He's by no means the savior. He's not going to, trumpet the rights of Christ the King or anything like that. His policies are very similar to Trump's, though, funny enough. It's all lower taxes, reduce mass immigration, strengthen the border, throw drug dealers in jail for longer, less repeat offender privileges and things, axing certain climate change taxes, removing the restrictions on resources. The thing about Canada that's so frustrating, we should be as rich as the Saudis,
Yeah.
We have 40 million people, and we have like the second largest oil deposit in the world or something insane. And that's not even including all of our minerals. We have oodles and oodles of all these minerals. We have 40 million people, and our country is bigger than the US as far as space.
Mm-hmm.
We have like the potential to diamonds and minerals. Like, it's just crazy what we have here. But we have all these wacky environmentalists that just make it impossible with all their things. So his whole thing is drill, baby, drill, dig what you want, whatever. He says we'll do it in like a sustainable way, because that's what they all say. Fine, whatever, I don't care. And people know that he can't fix the government overnight. We don't have the prime ministers here do not have executive order power.
Got it.
They can't do that. So it will be a slower process. But right now we're in a position where, to use an analogy, it's like, imagine someone's extremely obese and they're a long way from being healthy, like they're 200 pounds away, but they can immediately stop eating sugar and drinking Mountain Dew 2 liters a day and going to McDonald's. And as long as you stop that, you'll see like 50-pound gone in like a month. That's where we are. It's going to take a long time to get rid of that 150 after that, but we can radically improve the basics just by cutting out certain garbage, basically.
Well, what I was going to say is that if when we're done with RFK down here, we can send them up to you, and there goes, I don't know if they do red dye. Maybe you guys are very fortunate.
We don't, actually. Funny enough, like,
good for you.
I'm no fan of government overreach, but we do have very strict, like, so when we went down to Maryland at the end of 2022, we have friends in Maryland.
Yeah.
And my kids had never seen Fruit Loops.
Oh, really? Okay.
We're not like weird sugar Nazis.
Not like crunchy. Yeah.
We're not like, my wife makes all our food. Like, she's an amazing, she's a sourdough and all these things. Yeah. We love good food. But like, she bakes cookies and stuff. Like, we're not like sugar free until they're 7 years old or something like that. So we have cereal sometimes, but the Fruit Loops here suck because they're like pale color because you can't use the dyes. So we just never buy that stuff. So we went to the hotel, and for breakfast the one morning, I think she was like 4.5 at the time. Uh-huh. And she said, "Dad, look, colorful Cheerios." So we do, our food is different here, but
yeah. That's it. No, this has actually been one of the most surprising things, because I've grown up in a very conservative, very Republican farmland for most of my life. Then, of course, I moved to Los Angeles, got a huge culture shock. Now I'm back in blue Colorado. I'm about to move to St. Louis, which is red Missouri.
Barbecue.
I know, that's right. I know, and I can't say anything nice about Texas barbecue or anything like
or
that.
Kansas. Kansas City's claims they have the best, right?
Yeah. So dogmatic over that's wild. But it's weird because, growing up, you would have thought that the crunchy people, right, the people who would have trumpeted artificial dyes and the dangers of fast food and everything would have been the hippies that have become kind of the Democrats, the left, kind of growing up. And it's weird. It's a very, very nice, but I'm thinking, especially in the traditional Catholic circles that we inhabit, right, that you got all these like really crunchy sort of people, these people who are skeptical about anything processed. I have friends who are like on a raw milk kick and everything. Yep. And they're all like staunch, very conservative, very traditional values. And it's been one of those juxtapositions politically and culturally that I didn't foresee per se, but it's kind of welcome.
It's a funny thing, like if I had to, Thomas Sowell, right?
Oh, yeah.
I love Thomas Sowell.
Every Black conservative has to know Thomas Sowell.
That's true. But I love Thomas Sowell. But I used to, I watched one of his interviews one time, and he was asked by the interviewer, how would you describe what, because Thomas Sowell talks about how in his like teens and early 20s, he was a liberal, right? And that was like 80 years ago, because he's almost 100. Mm-hmm. And he's still kicking. He's still alive, right?
Yeah, he's still alive.
He's still kicking, yeah. I mean, he's still sharp. He's still smart. But he said, "What made you a conservative?" And he said, "Facts." And that's the thing. If I were to say, like, what would be the animating force behind conservatism, generally speaking, I would say, well, it's a desire to conform what you believe to what's actually real. So it's a funny thing that just now the sort of conservative side of things is starting to think about things like real food, because it seems like that would fit the mentality, but for some reason, for so long, it was just not really thought about. So it is a happy development that that whole crunchy thing has become more mainstream, because really it's like, you think about, you grew up in farmland and stuff, and I live not in the country home, but I live in a village surrounded by cornfields. So everyone around us farmers, and yeah, I mean, real food is associated with like hard work, and hard work is associated with like, don't take handouts. It seems very obvious that it would be conservative.
No, you would definitely think. And something that I've been really thinking about is like this election especially demonstrated this, but I could see the cracks forming when I was in Los Angeles. So there was a sign after all the riots, the George Floyd riots were going through Los Angeles, and it said, Black trans lives matter. It was spray painted, I think, down Hollywood Boulevard or something. Very pithy. And it was very funny because I said, okay, so I'm around all these different sorts of people in a very everyone's begging me not to go to LA, the most worst liberal hub ever. What I discovered is that the kind of very pithy, highly college educated, liberal Democrat, socialisty types who can afford their ideas don't have a lot in common with the Black families that have been there for a while in places like South Central. So you could write Black trans lives matter in West Hollywood. You would be stupid to write that in South Central or something, because I just found like, there was just such a obviously more practical streak to people, even if they voted, I think, against their interests. So something about this election of 2024 that I think has been really great is there was an uptick of, I would say, groups that for a lot of my childhood, for a lot of my life, I think the Republican Party and conservatives kind of wrote off. Well, we lost the working class, we lost the Black vote, we lost the Hispanics, we lost the women, and just this kind of consolidation and looking at politics as a pessimistic sort of view, which I think is almost kind of natural. And I think there's a tendency of that for conservative traditional types, because you're always trying to play like preservation. And so I think that it takes a lot more motivation to continue the preservation as opposed to a revolutionary who wants to go in and storm the castle gates, but is motivated enough to do so. So I wonder if there's been anything like that in the conservative Canadian politics. Has been maybe more of uniting around those sort of things that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, the whole mantra now, like, again, if you actually were to look at what Poilievre says, you look up clips, and some of them are pretty famous because he's a pretty good speaker. Mm-hmm. He's quick on his feet, and he's very articulate, and he keeps just trumpeting like this is common sense conservatism. And I look at, what's happening with the Republican Party, and they're like, we're returning to common sense, and it's not to harp on the boomers too much here. They get a lot of things thrown at them.
They could be harped on a little bit more still. That's okay.
But like this period since the Second World War, this is a broad statement, but I'll try to make sense of it.
Sure.
This last 60 years, 70 years, this boomer period, it's a very unnatural, very unusual time period in human history. I mean, we had just complete economic boom. Based on all the factors of all the bazillions of dollars that were thrown into industries and mechanization and technology for the war effort, all of those things got repurposed for industry. And so if you're graduating from college or even high school in like 1970, I mean, it was like, get a job somewhere, don't go to jail, and like you'll retire at 55, and your house is paid off. People just didn't, in general, obviously people always suffer, but there was it was a feast, it was a harvest for a long time. And that economy has kind of gone away. I mean, I'm 36. I thought I was going to be a teacher forever. I did the whole traditional college thing and the whole traditional route of get a degree, get a thing, and go get a job. And now I'm self-employed and I work on a computer and I make videos and write books. I mean, I never in a million years thought that I would do this. And, so I had a radical career change, and that's super normal for people now, like this whole lifestyle. So the categories that, because like 20 years ago, even, you could be someone who was relatively speaking pretty conservative in what you believed about morals, but like your industry was a union industry.
Yeah.
And the party that was going to get you that $10,000 raise and an early retirement age and more vacation days, that was an immediate need they could meet, and you could justify being part of the quote unquote left. And even though you weren't really left wing in what you believed about life, but that stuff's kind of died a lot. So now people are like, well, I'm not going to be automatic because I've been automatic for 20 years and the life my parents had isn't my life now. So it's forced people to just think more about practical things rather than, let's say, idealistic group things. And I think that's why we see a lot of the shift.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the exact name of the video, but it's a phrase from a book, but essentially it was like utopian ideas have a cost, which is why, again, you could have a Hollywood elite, let's say. I think there's a X account, right, that kind of charts Taylor Swift's flights and how some of them are just so short. And so the carbon footprint of Taylor Swift or Leonardo DiCaprio or something is going to be leaps and bounds beyond the average person, even a bunch of average people. And yet occasionally we get harped on the importance of the environment and all this and this. But practically that's an idea that only works if you have enough money to where you don't have to worry about the day-to-day of gas prices going up or something. Mm-hmm. Equally with this whole collapse of transgenderism. I mean, suddenly you have like, again, Gen Z, younger generations. I'm like one of the last of the millennials. And for a long time, I mean, I remember there's a Washington Post article from 2016. We're about to be in the midst of a blue renaissance, you know? These kids coming up are going to be more liberal and everything, but you can't afford those ideas. So suddenly you find a lot of people who are just wanting common sense. As you said, it's not even like it's some brand new thing that's being discovered. People are simply saying, hey, if I love Colorado, I'm going to buy a house in Missouri because I can't afford one here in my beloved state. Those ideas suddenly have a consequence, a real world reality. And so now there's this widening divide between people who have their houses, they've had their jobs, they've been able to settle in, and now they can espouse all these strange things because, well, they're comfortable. They don't need to be scrappy.
Well, and I mean, you can believe anything when your belly's full and your bank account's full.
Amen.
Because
Amen.
it has no, and but the transgender thing is interesting because there's a Russian philosopher, Alexander Dugin. He's pretty controversial. Like he's got interesting ideas. People say he's like Putin's whatever, who cares?
Yeah.
But he's an interesting philosopher, and he had an interview with Tucker Carlson, and it's short. It's like 40 minutes. Interesting interview though.
No.
And he made an excellent point, and he said the transgenderism was like the last frontier for liberalism, because what is liberalism? Liberalism is being free of hierarchical structures. That's ultimately what it is. This is why liberalism is necessarily Luciferian. It is, I will not serve, I will be served. That's what it is. And we can talk about this, we can segue, because we wanted to talk about the Trump democracy, monarchy thing. That's why democracy itself is necessarily, this is going to upset some people, it's satanic necessarily, because the notion is that we thrust people into power by our will, rather than we might elect or appoint people who assume offices that have their own power.
Yeah.
It's bottom up, which is satanic, versus top down, which is celestial. And the transgender thing was the last effort of liberalism, because okay, we've liberated from slavery, we've liberated from kings, we've liberated from government, sort of. We've liberated from church. We've liberated ourselves from God. We've liberated ourselves from marriage. We've liberated ourselves from having to have children because we can abort them or contracept. We've liberated ourselves from everything in reality except for biology. So it was like we have to free ourselves from these hierarchical constructs about our organs. And it's interesting to see, because I started teaching high school in 2015. I was 2014, I was elementary. 2015, I was when I started high school. And we were having these conversations with my grade 12s. And that's when the transgender thing was going insane.
Yep.
And they were mixed on it. But the ones that were really for it, I remember I had the conversation with my grade 12 religion class that I was teaching. Great. It was an amazing class. They were good kids. But there were some hardcore liberals in it, and we had like this very open dialogue, and it got to the point where at the time I was still playing rugby. I'm 240 pounds. I'm like 28 years old at the time. I'm only 10 years older than my students. And I said, okay, if I call myself a woman, I can go play for the women's rugby team and go hit a woman as hard as I could and probably break her bones. Like she's going to go to the hospital. And I really pushed her, and she said to her, in fairness to her, in her integrity, she said, well, as long as you believe you're a woman, you can. And the kids in the class were like, that's like, they kind of laughed. They were like, that's insane. And I kind of laughed, and I said, I'm sorry, this is crazy. Like, that's stupid. You know, I didn't say that to her, whatever, but,
right.
But it's stupid. So it's fizzling out really quickly. And what's interesting is we're going to see, like, I told you in the show we did last year, like I basically went through the whole Jordan Peterson cancellation thing, but I'm not famous, so no one knew. But I went through all the tribunals and stuff in my industry, and I was talking to a friend about it. We were having cigars and at a fire at his farm a year ago, and he said to me, "You know what's interesting, Kennedy?" He said, "All the stuff that they got you in trouble for, the system itself is going to be in trouble for from the parents in like a decade." And it's true, because all it's going to take is some poor kid who's been, and this has already happened in many places, but all it's going to take is some poor kid who's misled, depressed, his parents are woke and they trusted the school system or whatever, and that kid commits suicide, and the parents, this is going to happen to some family where the dad happens to be an executive at a bank, and he's got, take a hike type of money. Yeah. And he's going to say, sure, I'll spend $30 million to bring down this school system, or I'll spend $30 million to destroy this person's career because I'm on a vendetta. And that sort of stuff happens always. And they're going to basically get to the point where they're going to be in a court of law, and they're going to say, yeah, the teacher is basically culpable for this kid's suicide. And that sort of stuff is happening because we're seeing the consequences of transgenderism in the youth so acutely and so quickly that it's just dying because it's insane.
Something that always breaks my heart are now that YouTube's allowing them to be more public, even, but the story of detransitioners, right? Yeah. There's way more than I anticipated. I mean, this, admittedly, you talked about seeing this in 2014, 2015 when you were teaching. Heck, in 2012, they were debating legalization of gay marriage here, and I was a junior in high school, and that was novel. Like, the trans stuff completely snuck up on me. And so there's something very heartbreaking about the fact that we're looking back even now as things are, I think, swinging very, very hard, God willing, to some common sense. And just seeing how many people, like, reading these horror stories on Reddit or seeing on YouTube about people who are like, I was in the therapist's office or the doctor's office at age 10. And within an hour, they said, your kid is trans. And if my parents disagreed, my parents divorced, and my mom or whomever took me and put me in a dress, and I was chemically castrated, and I can't now have children. And it really does break the heart, the kind of evil that's been inflicted on kids,
But at least we have democracy.
This is absolute perfect. Well, at least, and that's the thing, right? But here's a funny thing, and this is such a classy segue there, because does anyone in their heart of hearts really believe in democracy? Nobody conducts their lives as if we live in a democracy. Like, we all live with someone has some ultimate power that's been given by God or by force anyway. No one conducts their business. You might have a council, like a constitutional monarchy, but nobody lives their family life, their relationship, really as like a 50-50 all the time, popular votes for everybody.
Well, that's the article I wrote for Crisis, and I was being, tongue-in-cheek, and I said, in the past, we had all these leaders who just got their positions and they weren't qualified, and it was all because of nepotism. But luckily, that doesn't happen anymore. In the past, we were told they took our money and spent it on things that we didn't like, but that doesn't happen anymore. Democracy doesn't exist. Like, the desire to not have kings is an attack on God, because it's an attack on fatherhood. and all paternity is from God. And everyone's now saying Trump's back. It's like dad came back and he got out his belt and he's going to clean things. Like that's everyone. And that's true. He's a king. He's a king. He is writing, he's signing things that are becoming law. They don't have to be voted on. And he's doing like 200 a day.
Yeah.
You know, and they're great. They're awesome. I love them all. You know, that'd be the one benefit about being absorbed by the states is the leader would have the executive power. But then, you know, I think that the Republicans will be in power for probably 12 years at least. I think Vance will. I'm
waiting for them to trip on their own tails personally.
They might. Who knows? But that's the projection. And
that's open, yeah.
And at a certain point, though, some liberals are going to get in, and they're going to use the same king power, and they're going to say this is part of the democratic process, and it's not. And the only way you get democracy is with bloodshed. It doesn't happen naturally. Like every revolution, you know, in France, the shackles of the king, they got them off. So what do? They genocided 100,000 Catholics in the Vendée, and then they had a bunch of revolutions, and you know, now they have dictators who get elected every few years, and it's the same thing in the States and so forth. You have to have, when you don't have a monarchy, even if it's symbolic, and, you know, things aren't perfect here in Canada, but the funny thing is that oath to the king they take, the fact that there's a throne in Parliament, the military, they still take the oath to the king and not to the prime minister. Those things have an effect. And our politics, until Justin Trudeau, were never as volatile as they are now.
Right.
And they were never like American politics. I never once saw an attack ad on a politician growing up. You didn't do that.
Yep.
Our campaigns for elections are 6 weeks. And they're not allowed to be any longer. And you can't run any ads outside of that. Like, it was just because it was always this understanding that you went to Parliament to perform a public service for the good of the country that was loyal to the crown. So there was never this belief that I'm going to be king, because there was a king or a queen. It was Queen Elizabeth II since like 1955.
Yep.
And when you get rid of kings, everybody else makes themselves into their own king. It's like Chesterton said, you know, if you don't have 10 commandments, you'll have 10,000 commandments. If you don't have one king, you'll have 10 million kings. And, you know, we believe that we're self-governed, so we select people to go self-govern ourselves. And they don't do what we want, so then we kick and scream about it. And then we get a new person that self-governs ourselves on our behalf that doesn't do what we want. And then we hate the other half of the country because the person who self-governs them in their interest isn't self-governing us. And we call the thing democracy. And it's just silly. It's just stop pretending is my point.
Well, I love the tagline. So your article, which I'll have to link for my viewers on Crisis Magazine. Can we finally go back to having kings? And your line below, I want Trump to be crowned as king, and I don't care who knows it. I don't want him to be king because I think he is perfect. I want him to be crowned so he can stop pretending that he isn't a king while he governs like one for 4 years. And you even just talk, I mean, I was there when he goes up on stage, and it's after we've seen this like little military procession of things and all these things in the Capitol, and he has the Book of Executive Orders, and everyone's like, it's like the Coliseum. Everyone's just going crazy.
Yeah, it's Roman art. It's like Rome.
It's so Rome. Yeah. I mean, even just watching it. And so one of my big takeaways of the inauguration, watching it, and I said, man, for people who talk a lot of mess about the tyranny of George III, how's that working out for us, by the way? But for us who talk a lot of mess, I could understand why in the early days they were like, should Washington be called a king? Yeah. Because we really pull out not even just the kingly stops. It's amazing watching the inauguration and all the ritualism and going, man, this country is screaming for like Catholicism, like a very deep set traditional feeling of divine right, because that's essentially what's happening with all the invocations of the different prayers across the different faiths and how Trump looks at the military procession. Like there's the swords. Oh my gosh, right? The ultimate stable of authority. And so I heard it was, I can't remember where I heard it, but you know, one of the things about American politics is that wherein in maybe a parliamentary system, you might have the president and the prime minister. And so the power of the executive may be a little divided. With Americans, it's all concentrated in the office of the president. And so no wonder every 4 years, especially right now, we go through these little mini civil wars that radically alter the policy and the outlook of the country.
Well, and then they also have to go to the priests who wear the black robes in the court.
Oh, that's absolutely right. Who reign as well. I know
who make the law. I
got to tell you, for being a Protestant, Freemasonic, totally we hate monarchy kind of nation, I am overwhelmed by what is it, Aristotle says that he outlines the three kinds of governance, and America somehow got the inverse bad of all three at the same time. We somehow got tyranny. What is it, tyranny?
Yeah. So the three types are monarchy, aristocracy, which isn't a bad word. It just means very good, successful elders who have experience being in that class. And then polity, which is like subsidiarity. And then the inverse of that is democracy, oligarchy, and tyranny.
Yep. And somehow we have all three at the same time right now. It's very strange.
Yeah. It's a big myth, though, man. Like, I love Tucker Carlson, But every once, like, I listen to him, I think he's great.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, though, he'll be saying something. And he's like, yeah, this is the freedom and democracy. And I'm like, dude, like, what are you saying? You're too smart to keep saying this. You don't actually believe that. Like, look into what those terms actually mean.
Right.
And it goes against, he's having this big Christian conversion, and it seems like he might become Catholic and all. And it's like, you don't believe any of the things when you really break them down. It's funny. There's a heresy called Americanism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It doesn't mean to be an American as a heretic, but it's basically liberalism.
Yeah.
And one of the famous American Catholic intellectuals was Orestes Brownson. And he totally was faithful and died in the good graces of the church. And there's no, but at the time, he was trying to argue, like, there was this sort of zeitgeist within 18th, 19th century Catholic thought, which was trying to find a way to make liberalism make sense.
Yep.
And Leo XIII was trying to do that before he was Pope. They thought he was a liberal. And then he came down and wrote like 55 encyclicals against liberalism. And they're like, well, that didn't work. And Orestes Brownson was basically trying to argue that, pragmatically speaking, the American system was ideal for the church because it was a free marketplace of ideas, and the Catholic ideas were the strongest, so they would win in the end. And it kind of made sense, but the reason why that notion got smacked down was because, and Brownson was a genius. This is like, there's wonderful stuff. You should read his works. And he was loyal to the church, so he didn't keep pushing with that after it was, dealt with. But it always comes back to paternity. Like, and that's the thing that is missing, is because, I did this like 13-part series on They've Uncrowned Him by Lefebvre on my Substack. And we just went through it, every chapter. And if you break it down to common sense principles, to speak of common sense, I would never say that I don't care what foods my kids eat. I don't care what television shows are available to them. I don't care what books they get, because I know in the end the best ones will prevail. That's not actually how it works.
Right.
They will poison themselves. They will watch immoral content. They will read bad books. Now, they might come out fine, but they might go to hell. And so I just say, nope, we are not going to have strychnine in our food. We are not going to have false religion in our books. And we're not going to have pornography on our computer. It's just not going to happen. I won't allow it. It doesn't have rights.
Yeah. Error has no rights.
And false religions have no rights. Religious liberty, this upsets so many people when I say this, which is why you invited me on, to make people mad. Religious liberty in the positive sense is blasphemous. To say that, and when I say positive, it's a technical meaning. Toleration, meaning you have a permission from the state, is different than a right. A right is you have the you have the right to do it. So, only the Catholic Church can have rights. All other churches cannot. All other religions cannot, because error has no rights, but more importantly, Satan has no rights. You can't say all religions have the same rights in our country, because you're saying Christ and the devil have the same rights. And it's absurd. And this is ultimately what liberalism and democracy and so forth requires. Now, you could have a Republican state, not like the party, but the style of government.
Yeah.
And those have worked in the past because their constitutions and their documents were not liberal. But they only ever worked as smaller countries in larger empires.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll say, well, the Venetians had a republic for a long time. Well, yeah, but Venice is a city, okay? So like, let's be honest. And it was in the Holy Roman Empire. And they couldn't do things that were out of step with the emperor who answered to God, you know? And all these things have to be rethought by people, especially American and Canadian Catholics. We have the same myths here and different, it's more subtle, but they're here.
Mm-hmm.
They all have to be rethought because if you follow them through to their basic principles, it really is a rejection of authority.
Are you noticing that trend? I mean, I'm seeing it here, certainly in politics here. I mean, there is an uptick not just of Catholics in governance right now, but traditional Catholics in particular, Catholics who are at least, they might hear that idea such as, the church being, of course, the teacher of the world God has given. Therefore, the church has rights and error doesn't have rights. Satan doesn't have rights. And yes, we're not saying burn down your Anglican neighbor's barn or anything, no. But at the same time, it's very clear that there is kind of this rejection of the Americanist heresy, I find, where you have more and more circles who are willing to listen when you say that there is a duty that the state and the church have to work together for the gratification of their citizens, for the good of their souls, and to stay away from religion, to pretend that, the church and the state should be just completely separate, that the kings are dead and they're old and they're fuddy-duddy. That's, making the world safe for democracy, as we've been doing the last 100 years. It's not working anymore.
Yeah, there's definitely, well, here's my thesis. I do think America will become a monarchy at some point. Because Rome became Rome had the kings. Sorry, Rome had the Senate. Rome had the kings.
Yep.
Then Rome had the Senate. Then Rome had the empire.
Yeah.
So they killed the king, either literally or metaphorically. I can't remember.
They drove him out, if I remember.
And then they made the Senate, where it was all democratic. And then they ended up having murder in there. And then they had an emperor. And they lasted with their emperor for centuries and centuries and centuries.
Can I just point out real quick that I think we are in such a Caesar timeline. They just missed assassinating Trump. But I looked at Barron came out on stage. Barron came out on stage, and I was like, well, there's Octavius.
He's all waving and whatever.
And
he even has the nose.
And I got to tell you, it's funny to me that even years on, even as good lovers of democracy, everyone loves Caesar. Nobody says that them stabbing Caesar, Brutus, Cassius, was a good thing. Everyone still, through Shakespeare's time to our time, there's still somehow a desire for the empire, for Caesar instead, because Caesar had the love of the people, which is interesting to me.
Well, because it's natural. Why are all these apocalyptic shows so popular in the last 10 years? The Walking Dead and all these kinds of things, the movies. Because what they show is that when you get rid of all the, I hate to sound like a social justice warrior, but when you get rid of all the constructs, which in the sense of democracy are artificial, when you get rid of all those and everything goes back to basic principles, what do you have? You have people rallying around a guy who's usually really good at fighting and really smart, really tough, but also kind of empathetic. And it helps if he's handsome to carry the show.
Yep. And
he becomes your leader. And he leads you into battle, and everyone respects him for that. And that's the only way you rebuild society. That's a natural thing. Monarchy of any sort, and an emperor is a monarch. It's hereditary, and he is the right, whatever. It represents God's order for civilization. Heaven is not a democracy. Heaven is not somewhere where you vote. Even the voting of the Pope, it's an election by confreres for the best person to hold an office that has the authority independent of those who elect him. This is why there's, the classic Sede Vacantist arguments, and there are some smart Sedes, but when you look at when you look at the debate, when you look at the citations that a lot of the Sede intellectuals again, many of whom are very intelligent. I don't mean to strawman their position, but when you look at the various saints and the theologians like Bellarmine and Cajetan and so forth, you always get to this sticking point where it's like, we don't really know how you could actually get rid of the Pope because you don't really have that power, because you can't. And it's frustrating, but it's frustrating because of our sinfulness. It's frustrating because of our disorder. And we have this natural, we have this, because of the fall, we have this tendency to view authority as suspect. Also, all of the authorities that are monarchical empires, whatever, they must necessarily be beholden to God over man.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a checks, and this is why the church is necessarily important. I mean, you look at the life of St. Ambrose, and he's like calling the emperor to repentance publicly.
Yeah.
He can't come receive communion unless he puts on sackcloth and ashes and apologizes for an unjust war he did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's the check and balance for an emperor. Now there's none. I mean, there's no check and balance on the morality of a president, but there is of a king. Go figure.
Maybe it's because, like, I've heard the very flippant, very unfortunate phrase where there's sometimes people say, well, only God can judge me. And it's like, well, yes, but what they're saying by that is that there's therefore no authority that can hold me. But that is not how good governance, certainly good monarchy, works. It's like God does judge you, and you have an obligation because you'll be judged very harshly if you have treated your citizens, your subjects, whatever, poorly. If you have gone for your own personal gain over what governance should be, which is to lay down your life for your people.
Do you know who Dave Ramsey is?
Yeah, Ramsey. Are you kidding me? I'm like a Ramsey warhawk sometimes.
I love Dave Ramsey. We adopted his system a few years ago in our, like, for our finances. I love it.
That's how I'm going to buy a house. It's fun.
That's right.
Without a credit score, everyone in my life can shut up, which I really mean. Y'all can be quiet now.
It works.
It works.
It just works. It's grandma's economics.
Uh-huh.
It's grandma's economics. What he says is God and grandma's economics.
Yep.
And he's correct. And when he was on Tucker, and Tucker was asking him, like, you know, what makes an economy go? And he's so Ramsey's so common sense. And he just said, listen, I talk to all these big finance guys and they have all their theories. And he's like, but you know what makes an economy go? Is the confidence that people have in the direction of the country. And he used a great analogy. And he said, technically speaking, in the United States, 54% of businesses are technically small businesses. Now, that means 500 employees or less, but they're not large corporations. No. And large corporations can weather uncertainty because they play the stock game. They lay off people to meet their bottom lines and quarters and things like that. Small corporations can't do that. They have to use real money to do real stuff. So when they're not certain what the rules of the game are, they don't invest. Mm-hmm. And when they don't invest, they don't grow. Under Bill Clinton, the American economy did really well for small businesses. Not because Clinton had great policies, but because Clinton was a strong leader, despite all his faults, and you knew what the rules were. If you know even if the taxes are high, but you know what they are, and you know that you'll be able to do your job, you know that the policies are what they are, and there's not the state of flux and uncertainty, you'll say, well, I know what the rules are, so I'm going to play the game. When you don't know what's going to happen, you don't invest.
Yep.
This is an allegory or a microcosm of all of our systems of governance only function as well as the animating story suggests that they should function. So, yes, you can have bad kings. Yes, you can have bad presidents and so forth. But if the story, and I believe obviously the gospel is a true story, but let's just look at it from a basic perspective. If the story is, you are the father of these people, they're your children, that's how you get someone like a Blessed Carl.
Yeah. You
don't get a Blessed Carl in democracy. The closest you get is Gabriel Garcia Moreno in Ecuador, and he wanted to reestablish the Spanish monarchy and fight the Freemasons. Mm-hmm. And that's why they assassinated him. If your story is, we are a self-governing people, we create our own destiny, and I answer only to my voters, then you descend into insanity pretty quick. And there's really no way to fix it unless the people, so to speak, they decide that they want to serve the higher purpose. And that's what's happening in a sense under Trump. That's the one big difference between the Canadian conservative and the American. The American conservative movement is very much animated by Christian sentiment. You'll never hear Pierre Poilievre, even though he's a baptized Catholic, you'll never hear him talking about Jesus Christ in Parliament. But Trump, despite his own personal issues,
right,
he'll say things like, we gotta listen to Jesus and stuff like that. And I hope he means it, but people believe he means it. And that's stronger than any policy.
Kennedy, tell me before you go, what are you working on? What are you up to? Obviously, if my listeners who should be subscribed to you on YouTube, they definitely need to, if not. But what you been up to otherwise, work-wise?
Well, I've been making a ton of friends with all the things I write about.
Yeah, you are.
I wrote a book on the charismatic renewal, which was challenging but necessary. It's called Charismania. It's available on Amazon and on Audible. I did the audiobook for it. I just actually today finished submitting my last round of edits with the copy editor for my book called What Happened to Catholicism, which is coming out from Crisis, but Sophia, like it's the imprint of Sophia, same publisher as Taylor Marshall's Infiltration, and it's coming out April 15th. I have been growing my Substack. It's called Mere Tradition. And a lot of the stuff I put out there is public and free, but then I also have paywall stuff, which helps me be able to do this full time, you know. I do speaking gigs. I have been led a pilgrimage to Italy in November. We're running a men's conference here with my Holy Name Society, third annual. And what else am I doing? Narrating some audiobooks and my YouTube channel. So a bunch of stuff going on. But you can find, if people are interested, it's a really difficult thing to remember. So write it down, guys. It's kennedyhall.ca. Okay. kennedyhall.ca. That's hard. Okay. It's CA for Canada. Okay. The domain name was cheaper if I did CA versus .com. It was like $20 a year for that, or it was $6,000 for the
and
.com.
And you out yourself at the same time.
Yeah, but it was $6,000 for the .com, and I'm like, this is stupid. It was .ca was like $300 for 7 years or something crazy.
Yeah, do that.
And so I did that. And if you go there, it's just a business card website. It just links to all my stuff. So everything I do is there on the front page and whatever.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely try to link those in the show notes below. But hey, thanks so much. We always have such fun when we're on together. So I'm gonna have to get you on again real soon. We'll talk about SSPX bishops and what will come next. You know, because you've already blacklisted yourself. I should barely talk to you as it is, but you know, I feel
I'm nuclear.
That's absolutely right.
I say what everyone believes.
That's so true. Like it's so like it's almost like, man, 10 years ago it was one thing, but now I feel like there's so many people, or even my parents are even kind of getting wise to some of this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, something's in the water. So hey, thank you so much for coming on. People, please check out his work, check out and subscribe to his YouTube channel, and please don't forget to like. We'd love to hear your experiences. If you're one of my great subscribers in Canada, love to hear your experiences, or Americans, or across the world. It doesn't really matter to me. And please also check out our Patreon, patreon.com/GladTradPodcast, if you'd like to support the show. Until next time, God bless you and may He keep you.
Thank
Adios.
You.